Hello all, I am Esoteric Mosaic, and welcome. This channel is an iceberg of every conspiracy you can think of, based in reality. The stuff right in your face that requires no speculation. The stuff your friends and coworkers may mock you for. I want to reduce the amount of fear in the world by creating coherency, for those of you capable of abstract thought. I intend on showing the fractal truths of reality that can be applied in the micro and the macro. The plan is to compile these ideas into a logically sound mosaic that can be called back to. Using your God-given brain to deduce lies is your best defense against evil. I spent a ton of time on this research and I hope you enjoy. Without further ado, I present you with Episode 1 of Breaking Spells, The Nuclear Bomb. I'm sure you all remember we were taught as kids in elementary, maybe even middle school, that the US ended the Second World War by creating the most devastating weapon known to man, called the atom bomb, or more accurately named atom bomb, as in bomb of man. We were taught Hiroshima was the first time a nuclear weapon was used during war. 3 days later, the second nuclear bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, and allegedly this caused the Japanese to surrender due to its sheer killing power and devastation. These bombs were said to cause radiation for hundreds of years that no life could ever endure. What if I told you Russians were taught a very different history lesson? Mainstream claim number 1. The nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the reason for Japan's surrender in September 1945. Many of today's historians believe that Japan did not surrender because of the nuclear bombings, but surrendered because the Soviets invaded Manchuria on August 8th with 1.5 million soldiers. To make matters worse, Russia had a 5-to-1 superiority in tanks and were well on their way to conquer Japan. But, Eso, that's today. Who cares what they think? You know what? You're right. Let's see what the experts had to say during that time. Enter General Dwight Eisenhower. Soon after the surrender, Dwight stated, Japan was already defeated and that dropping the bomb was completely unnecessary. Some of you are probably thinking, well, hey, that's just the U.S. Army General and later President of the United States. Who gives a damn what he thinks? You know what? That's a great point, and I'm with you. Let's ask head of the air unit that literally dropped the nukes. The narrative we're given states the plane that dropped both nuclear bombs was a B-29 plane of the 21st Bomber Command. The head of this unit was Major General Curtis LeMay of the U.S. Air Force. In the following months after Japan's surrender, had this to say, the atomic bomb had nothing to do with the end of the war at all. How dare I, right? You're probably thinking, why did Japan go along with the false narrative? Wouldn't they just snitch? Stay with me, people. Nukes served a purpose to Japan as well as the United States. Japan had and still has a strong warrior and honor culture where surrender was seen as shameful. This is the same country that practiced kamikaze and seppuku, where samurai would disembowel themselves with their tanto blade as opposed to being captured to atone for their shame. To put it simply, Japan does not surrender. Would you rather admit to losing a war due to strategic mistakes, or because the enemy has a miracle weapon that blots out the sun, destroys and irradiates everything for years to come? To me, the choice seems very obvious. The mainstream narrative is much less shameful than the truth. Mainstream claim number 2. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were uniquely destroyed. Given what we know, I would like to perform a fun exercise. Just give me an honest answer, no cheating. Which of these post-war Japanese cities would you guess is Hiroshima? Is this Hiroshima? Is this Hiroshima? Or is this Hiroshima? Okay. Have your answer? That was a trick question. None of them are Hiroshima. All of the cities I just presented to you were hit with carpet bombs, aka fire bombs, according to the mainstream record. They worked by pilots dropping accelerant on a city and then bombing it to create massive fires. Knowing this, here's a picture of post-bombing Hiroshima after the alleged nuclear bomb. Tell me what differences you spot. The point is, there essentially is no difference, and personally, if I didn't know any better, I would assume Hiroshima was hit with the same carpet bombs as the other cities. Let's just take a look at the stats, and that should clear everything up, right? Well, you're not going to like this either, because Hiroshima and Nagasaki were not even in the top 10 most destroyed cities. Cities like Tokyo, 51% destroyed, as well as Toyama, 99% destroyed, and dozens of others destroyed much more than the two nuked cities, and admittedly by the same mainstream narrative, firebombs. Wait a minute. How can this be? Wouldn't a nuclear blast do much more damage than just firebombs? Some of you might be saying, I don't know, bro. I would much rather ask someone that was actually there and could see the aftermath, rather than looking at these silly black and white photos. Enter Major Alexander Seversky. Alexander was a Russian-American aviation figure that visited Hiroshima soon after the alleged nukes were dropped and had a lot to say about the subject. Hiroshima looked exactly like all other burned out cities in Japan. Only one of the 21 of the city's bridges were down. I looked for a bald spot where everything presumably had been vaporized. It wasn't there, or anywhere else. I could find no traces of an unusual phenomenon. After looking at some windows and even paint structurally still intact, he concluded the blast impact, therefore, could not have been unusual. He concluded his findings stating the atomic bomb was just another bomb, and that the bomb's effect was merely due to the flimsy construction of the Japanese city. You're probably thinking, hey SO, get real buddy. He wasn't a structural engineer. He was a pilot. What the hell does he know? A quick Google search tells us that in the 1940s almost all Japanese houses were made out of wood, straw, and paper. Japanese architecture in the 1940s was quite literally the perfect fire tender. So just a quick recap. We've determined the two cities allegedly hit by nuclear bombs had far less damage than the other cities that were only firebombed. We've also given significant evidence to suggest alternative motives behind the Japanese surrender of the war. So how do we even know it was a nuke? This is where the fun really starts. You're probably thinking right now, but what about the radiation? And the cancer? And the mushroom cloud? Ever heard of Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island? Fucking idiot. You're absolutely right, and don't worry, I'll get to that. Mainstream claim number 3. The bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki caused massive radioactive contamination. Fact. After the alleged nukes were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the residents never evacuated. Birds and wildlife also never left. This is especially remarkable if you have ever heard the phrase, canary in a coal mine. This old practice became an idiom to convey the idea that any animal with less biomass requires a significantly less toxic load in order to die. Before miners had digital carbon monoxide detectors, they would bring a canary into their mine, so that way if their canary died, they would be warned of the toxins and could leave safely. It's safe to say if any life was harmed by the long-term effects of radiation, it would be small birds and wildlife, right? Yes. However, this notion is completely unfounded. All the animals that existed at that time are still there, with no mutations. So why is there no fallout at all? Let's look at another example of massive radioactive contamination. Chernobyl. That might have been the easiest Google search of this whole video. Like this is getting comedic. CEZ in northern Ukraine is a thriving ecosystem for wildlife, with many species returning after the 1986 nuclear disaster. Okay, I'm going to try and say this with a straight face. The CEZ is now Europe's third largest nature reserve. You can't make this up. I just had to include this one. The world's most unlikely nature reserve. Wildlife is thriving in Chernobyl. As the narrative starts slipping, something needs to be done. Enter Neil deGrasse Tyson. astrophysicist, and essentially today's version of a priest class. He can say whatever the hell he wants and gets away with it.
My question was, if we can do that, if we can hit the asteroid, could we do that with nuclear weapons? Because it's getting a little chippy out there with Putin. And I don't, I mean, I love Ukraine, but do I love them enough to get radiated?
But you can't do nothing, right? I mean, if in fact there's a tactical nuke that's used by Putin, obviously there needs to be a response.
Okay.
Well, plus modern nukes don't have the radiation problem, just to be clear.
Really?
You still blow to smithereens, but yeah, it's a different kind of weapon than the Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Nuclear weapons, if they're exploded, don't have a radiation problem?
Not if there's hydrogen bombs, no. Not in the way that we used to have to worry about it with fallout and all the rest of that. What you really have to worry about is being vaporized, and after that, if you're not vaporized, blown to bits by the shockwave. That's a way bigger problem that you're going to have.
Now, reflecting on the facts I've presented you thus far, we know Hiroshima and Nagasaki never had any radiation to begin with. First lie. Then he starts backtracking to explain, oh no, don't worry, the new nukes don't have that radiation and fallout problem. And second lie. No nukes ever had the fallout problem, bud. The problem with Neil is he didn't even bother learning the new script. He just went ahead and started making his own. Fact checkers say there is not fallout because the bombs were detonated at 600 meters above ground level, and the atmosphere just absorbed it. Well, this goes against every bit of propaganda they've put out in the last 70 years. I remember hearing about acid rain that would poison the crops and kill everything. What happened to that? Moving on, there's a lot more to debunk. What about the mushroom cloud and the shock wave? TNT also makes mushroom clouds, and if the velocity of the explosion's body exceeds the speed of sound, it creates a shock wave. Now for my favorite part. Let's look at some official nuclear test footage. I'll let it play through once. See if you notice anything weird. Wow, that's really convincing, right guys? Well, why is the camera not destroyed? Not only is the camera not destroyed, if you didn't know, you can't put classic camera film through airport security. An X-ray machine at the airport will just wipe the film. How does X-ray radiation compare to a nuclear bomb? That's not even all. According to the mainstream narrative, a nuclear bomb gives off an EMP that would wipe all electronics. Let's see what the mainstream narrative says about these objections. I honestly don't know what's funnier, the nuclear test footage itself, or their excuses for how they were able to do so. Cameras used to film the nuclear test footage are not destroyed because they are placed in specially designed protective enclosures. Well, isn't that the whole point of a nuke, is to bust through protective enclosures? Often made with lead shielding, positioned far away from the blast. Wait, pause. Now, I'm not sure how this squares with your reality, but if I'm not mistaken, this shot is taken inside a house. That's one hell of a lead shielding, am I right? Let's say that's not good enough. Let's say the camera is 5 miles away. It would still be destroyed given the blast radius. Nonetheless, I'll entertain it. Here we have an angle obviously pointing down at a house. Let's estimate, say, 30 degrees. We have the right angle with the ground where the camera is mounted. Now, I'm no mathematician, but you can create a rough Pythagorean problem with the given information, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and conclude if the camera was 5 miles away, it would also be a couple thousand feet in the air. I did the math. It's 45,726 feet to be exact. What's it sitting on, genius? I thought it was in a bunker. Not to mention the blast is coming from the direction of the camera. I'm not even going to get into the cars disappearing and reappearing, but you get the point. This is absolute nonsense. You may call me a conspiracy theorist. We do not care. This is retarded. I can sit here and debunk nuclear test footage all day long. A lot of people think they're smart because they're educated. However, they don't actually know a damn thing. Education does not equal intelligence. The reason I picked this topic is because nukes might be the dumbest thing humanity has ever fell for. Right behind abortion, of course, but that's a topic for another day. Moving on, why didn't anyone say anything in the media? Fact. The media was much more controlled then in the 1940s than now. Contradicting the U.S. War Department would get you executed. Now for the most ridiculous devil's advocate question yet. But why would our government lie? Put yourself in the position of power at the time. You just finished 2 of the bloodiest wars in human history. How do you keep it from happening again? Mad, or mutually assured destruction. And right on time, the Cold War starts in 1947 and is what the next 45 years were all about. The nuclear scare was a clever method, however there's psychological damage for a lie on that scale. Think of how many children weren't born because of the fear, why would I bring a child into this world with nuclear bombs? We now know the powers that be want to lower the population. They get awards for it. Not even joking, it's called the UN Population Award. Simply, never act out of fear. It's almost always a trick, but you have to choose. It's always a choice. They don't make you do anything. The devil lets you build your own prison. Isaiah 54:17. No weapon formed against thee shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against thee in judgment thou shalt condemn. God chooses when you die, not man. I saved the best for last. The man that blows this whole nuclear scare out of the water. Galen Winsor. Galen Winsor is an absolute legend. He worked for General Electric and was the manager of safety and analytical service of Hanford Nuclear in 1950. He might be the most educated person on the subject to ever live. He helped design, build, and ran a process for extracting plutonium from what we now call nuclear waste. At Hanford, he would process this so-called nuclear waste to be reused over and over. Galen calls it spent nuclear fuel. He discovered it is indeed recyclable, meaning no radioactive waste. Once upon a time, there was no regulations on radioactive handling. Galen would transport radioactive material and work on the plant with no protection. Here's what he had to say about the people that came to impose all these restrictions. I suggest you watch the entire 1.5-hour video to get a better understanding. Link in the description. Trust me, it's worth every second.
And finally, one day, I said, my own personal security is not important. I think I'll go tell this tale. All I want is to tell my story. The commodity that I communicate is called truth. But in September 1950, I got into this thing called plutonium processing when we did it barehanded, without instruments, without coveralls. We had some of the most peculiar acid burns in some of the shirts, and I found one of those the other day. It's got acid burns all up the front of it. Plutonium on it, too. Amazing. That was normal operation in those days. We ran those facilities, and we ran them so well that by 1965, we had separated enough plutonium when it only existed in the parent uranium matrix to 1/2 of a single weight percent, 0.005 weight fraction of plutonium maximum in that fuel, and we processed enough tons of uranium to recover enough plutonium by 1965 to meet the weapons needs of this country 10 times over for the foreseeable future. Well, we had rules that said 3R per year is your allowable exposure, that amount of gamma energy that will expose a film pack. But that was for the people that didn't know. We weren't about to follow those rules. We just went ahead and did the job. They send around an investigation slip that says your dosimeter was overexposed 2 weeks ago. What did you do? And they had a cute little form on it that says accidentally exposed to light, and that was the one I always used to check. Because it's the same amount of light. You know, if you get gamma through the film pack, it's the same amount of light as you get when you click the lens on a camera. They wanted to limit us to that. And one day we looked up, and they had limited us to that amount of exposure. Then the fun part of the game begins. You say, who limited us to that? Are they powerful? Yeah, they control the purse strings. They live by the golden rule. Them that's got the gold makes the rules. If you like your work, you keep the rules. If you don't keep the rules, you disappear. Sure enough, some of us disappeared. Some of my friends gone. Where'd they go? I don't know. That's when I started to kick over the traces. Up to that point of time, I thoroughly enjoyed my work. I had no limitations, practical limitations. I had all the money to spend. I was in charge of the design effort. I built it the way that I wanted to because it was technically correct. All I had to do was check with engineers and make sure that it was right. And all of a sudden I was told, you must reduce your limits of exposure by a factor of 10. I says, I won't do it. First thing you know, you got the word that says, oh, yes, you will. I says, no way. Well, that's when the rebel, Galen Windsor, started to show up. And when I found out that by management conference I couldn't get to these guys, I figured out another way. Now, in this plant is a beautiful pool. It's got a place to store spent fuel bundles till it won't stop. 660,000 gallons of water, demineralized, just as clear and pretty as it can be. Heated to 100 degrees Fahrenheit when the outside temperatures are minus 20, wind chill factors down to a minus 60, and I found out that I could swim in that rascal. You turn off the lights at night and it had a light blue Cherenkov effect. And this kid from Nevada that never could pass up a warm swimming hole used to go swimming in that pool. There wasn't anybody that had the nerve to swim with me, but since I was manager of safety and analytical service at this plant, it was mine to use. Oh boy. I found out that I could do that. I showed some financial types one time that I could stir that pool with my bare hand and check out through the same radiation monitors they did without triggering it. GE didn't like it. I got a letter from him that says, thou shalt not tell financial types that you can swim in the pool, that you can stir it with your hand, because if they find that out, they will steal the inventory. They will know that the inventory can be stolen. Oh, is that a valuable inventory? The same material that's labeled high-level waste by our current government. Well, through the years, we got pretty good at telling what a critical mass was. And I have worked in a plant where I had half a critical mass in this hand, barehanded, dressed in street clothes, half in this hand, wearing a lab coat, and I'd put this half in a pocket on this side and this half in a pocket on this side and walk down the hall. If those two ever got together, there would be a blue flash. They never got together because I was in between them. And we do that every day. Enter the great pretenders. They said that 5 grams of plutonium, properly distributed over the face of the Earth, would kill everybody on Earth. Now, if you can only get one 20 kiloton weapon to go on 2,500 grams, how's 5 grams going to kill everybody on Earth? Early on, I had a fear that said, if there is this much fissile material, that can undergo a chain reaction, we called it in the beginning, then if you set a match to it, all the fissile material in the world is just going to keep right on going. Totally unfounded fear. Well, those of us who worked with it enjoyed it. We knew what we were doing. We worked at it. When the President of the United States decided not to operate that fuel reprocessing plant, I started scrambling to find out what was going on. Many things had been done in the name of health and safety. Don't get burned. You got to have a safety record. You have to be safer than anybody else. We were already safer than anybody in the whole world. Well, you can't afford to get burned with this. You've got to enforce the limits. You've got to keep it. And I says, hey, that's not what the ball game is at all. I'll bet you the ball game is something else. And in 1982, when the Congress passed the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, a guy by the name of Mo Udall, I don't know whether you people in Arizona have ever heard of him or not, authored that bill. It's called the High-Level Waste Disposal Act of 1982. The material he called waste is the reusable uranium fuel that I had been working on for 32 years. Needless to say, Mo Udall and I do not agree. How much is it worth? In inflated dollars, a ton of reusable uranium fuel contains useful metal isotopes worth upwards of $10 million a ton. Mo Udall says it's high-level waste. The value of reusable uranium fuel scheduled for permanent disposal probably exceeds the national debt.
I need you all to understand the gravity of what he just said. The value of what our government calls waste likely exceeds the national debt. That reason alone would give our government motive to do just about anything. Galen could have just dropped the mic at that point, but wait, it gets so much better.
If it is light water reactor fuel at less than 5% equivalent fissile content, you can handle it, you can do anything you want with it, you can stack it up, you can have a room full, you can have a handful. As long as you keep it dry, it will not sustain a chain reaction. What then is all this falderall about a little bit, 5 grams, will kill everybody in the world? They don't know what they're talking about. And when they say that, they're thumbing their nose at measurement experts like Galen Winsor. I am insulted when they say those things and get away with it, because it has no bearing on the truth. You know, there isn't any one of the radioisotopes out there that has a meaningful level of reconcentration in any of the species, not even the oysters in the bays in Maryland, below Calvert Cliffs. Why then are we still playing this game that any amount of this material is of hazard? Reusable uranium fuel, which has been isotopically enhanced in power-producing reactors, is a valuable national resource, not a high-level waste. I started playing a game one day, 7 years ago. I says, okay, Portland General Electric, you've got the Trojan reactor, you've got a storage basin problem, I'm going to make you an offer. I made them an offer that says, I will take all of your spent fuel, FOB your basin, if you will give it to me. In other words, I will take it off your hands at no expense to you. I will ship it, I will store it, I will do everything that needs to be done to that fuel. And you know what they told me? Can I quote them? Go to hell, Galen Windsor. We value it more valuable than platinum or gold. We're going to play the plutonium futures ourselves. Well, swimming in it didn't have the desired effect. So I decided I had to be more direct with these people that were giving me trouble. They were kind of hard to teach, so I went to drinking a glass of it a day. I had the bottle of it. Last time I went swimming, I filled this 2-liter bottle with water and washed it off on the outside in the shower when I washed me off on the outside so that we didn't tattletale. You know, radioactive material is just a trace or a tattletale. So you got to get it off so they won't know that you've been swimming in the pool and drinking the water. So I took this bottle in and set it on my desk. And who would suspect that the manager of safety and analytical service had a bottle of spent fuel pool water sitting on his desk, and he drank a glass of it every day.
This was unheard of.
Nobody ever did that crazy stunt before.
How has that affected you, Galen?
Well, as near as I can tell, it made me about 6'4" in my cowboy boots, 210 pounds, and really quite a nice fellow.
In your estimation, then, how dangerous is a nuclear reactor plant?
A nuclear reactor plant is just a way to boil water that's the cleanest, neatest, most economical way to boil water that you've ever seen. And so, in my estimation, nuclear reactors ought to be insured under the same insurance policy as any other steam boiler plant, power generating plant. And to have special consideration under the Price-Anderson Act means that the insurance industry has already paid off the Congress so that they can have a ripoff, charging ever in higher and higher insurance premiums, total coverage much, much greater for a non-existent risk. What a racket.
Can a nuclear plant explode?
Only like any other steam plant. Like Laughlin, Nevada had a steam explosion. It's a coal-fired plant, but 6 men were killed there last year. That could happen at a nuclear plant, but as far as an atomic explosion, good heavens, no. No way. See, I spent 3 weeks on the island in March of 1981, the 2-year anniversary of this particular, quote, accident. And Tom Hall, who stood alongside Enrico Fermi when they pulled the control rods on 100B in October 1944 at Hanford, and I were delegated to go to the island and find out what happened, and so we did. We went over all of the records and everything else, and near as we could tell from performance records, 51 thermocouples, for instance, only one of which went over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The center line temperature of those rods when they're running is 4,032 degrees Fahrenheit. And so they say things like over 50% of the core was greater than 4,000 degrees. Yes, it was. If it wasn't running at 100% power. So they take that kind of information and bugger it all up so that you don't understand what's going on. They give you a little bit of it. Well, the worst joke that people could dream up, and they says, do you know what the NRC's worst nightmare is? No, I don't know what that is. Galen Windsor and Tom Hall in the TMI-2 control room for an hour by themselves. You know why people that know laugh? These crazy guys from Hanford would have started that baby up and showed that it would run. We'd have started it up, and they were afraid of us.
So there was no accident at 3 Mile Island?
No, they did it on purpose. Shut it out.
Very interesting. Can nuclear radiation cause mutation in people and animals?
If a cell gets too much radiation, it dies. And so if it is a sperm or an ovocyte, why, they die. They don't reproduce, and there are no mutations. I think the good Lord built that safety factor in.
So you're saying that mutation in future generations is an unfounded fear.
Yes, and the studies of the people at Hiroshima and Nagasaki have borne that out. Those people do not have that.
Galen, what and where are these burial sites and what's in them for this so-called nuclear waste? I've been hearing stories about stainless steel containers buried in concrete under the ocean, boiling for over 2,000 years.
That sounds like a real story. Let me start out by saying there are no nuclear waste, only materials created in a reactor to be recovered and used beneficially. Now, high-level waste is radioactive and self-heating, and so fuel, reusable uranium fuel, fits that definition. But if you disregard its intrinsic worth, why then, yeah, it would fit the definition of high-level waste. But let's say there isn't any high-level waste, only material to be recovered and used beneficially. Then what's the low-level waste fiasco? That's an excuse for a federally mandated, non-inspectable disposal system so that organized crime can get rid of any evidence that they want and it can never be dug up again.
They're afraid to look in there.
Not afraid. They don't want you to. They've got rules on the transport so that if you have an accident with a low-level radioactive waste shipment, why, you call out all of the state police and you make sure that nobody looks at it, that nobody gets exposed, that there's no spreading of the contaminated material. And it's also that you don't find out whose body's in that drum. The situation got so bad that the smell of human flesh was so great that they made it so that you could ship animal biological waste in refrigerated vans so that it wouldn't stink up before you got it buried.
What is then in these low-level or high-level or whatever containers under the ocean?
Nothing. But if you see, they were one time dropping barrels of radioactive waste off barges in the ocean. Do you know what was in them? Not high-level self-heating radioactive waste. Probably had a few bodies and a few guns and a few knives and a few evidences in them too. If you drop them in the ocean, they are truly disposed of. If you put the probe right there, the meter goes off scale and you can hear it, all right? Hot. Radiation, gamma radiation, is the most penetrating of all radiation. Oh, is it? All it's got between the rock and the probe is my hand. Doesn't count so pretty much, does it? What if I put the rock behind me? You don't suppose they've been lying to you, do you? I suspect they have. Well, let's do a little bit more. I got a black bottle. This stuff comes in white bottle. A bottle of no-dose. You can send children down to the drugstore to buy no-dose. All they need is money. In this are 60 white caffeine pellets. And this one is uranium oxide, U3O8. You can't buy it for love nor money. The state of Washington sent 2 of their Gestapo agents over to my home to confiscate my uranium samples on the 17th of December last year. Got a challenge. I'd like to have somebody in the room volunteer to take all of this bottle or all of this bottle. The only thing that I'll tell you is that one of them won't hurt you and the other one will kill you. Do you want the white stuff or the black stuff? White stuff? You do. There's enough in there to kill 4 men your size. The government says we got to ban this material. It's radioactive. Let's check it in the bottom of the bottle. Not very radioactive. Let's take the cap off. Oh goodness, very radioactive. This instrument will only count gamma, energy. It's just energy. Light's coming from those lights, only you're getting lots of infrared from the lights as well as ultraviolet. Energy response, and it's very carefully damped to only discriminated so it only gets the energy that comes from this. I don't want it to respond to a light, just to this. Cost me $1,000 to get an instrument that'll just respond to this and not to that. Okay, radioactive material. You pour it out in the hand, and that's radioactive contamination. Is it radioactive? Yeah, it is. Very radioactive. Now, decontamination is nothing but scooping it back up and putting it into the bottle. I just now decontaminated my hand. No, I didn't do such a good job. Not good at all. Is it still radioactive? Yeah, that's called residual radioactivity. Now, under the decontamination rules of the government, when you decontaminate somebody like this that's that contaminated, and this is certainly a reportable incident under current DOE regulations, when you decontaminate him, it has to go down a controlled drain so that you don't disperse radioactivity. Do I qualify as a controlled drain? That material that I just ate is not soluble in body fluids. Like it's been this. It was fired at 940 degrees C, where it becomes U3O8, known in the industry as HCl insoluble. In other words, it will not dissolve in concentrated hydrochloric acid, hot. Your stomach has 10th normal hydrochloric acid in it, so it won't even dissolve. The stuff is so fine that it has no texture to it. Doesn't even feel rough. So it's tasteless, odorless, has no texture. How is it supposed to hurt me? Because I've been eating this on lecture tour for 2 years, the state of Washington felt it necessary to confiscate my uranium samples so that I would be safe. Dr. Fulton from the Hanford Environmental Health Foundation called up and he says, "Hey, I heard one of your guys OD'd on uranium today, Galen." And we talked for a little while and he says, "Oh, that was you." The spark that just came off there is pyro, fire, burned. If it's plutonium, I just contaminated this area of Arizona in excess of the EPA's limit for 1 square mile of surface. Somebody laughed. It's serious. The end of progress altogether says that I just contaminated you in excess of the limit for 1 square mile. It's now silver on the end. Tomorrow it'll be black because it self-oxidizes, this black color like this, all by itself. Plutonium does that and uranium does that. Is it hazardous? Yeah, it is, because they take depleted uranium metal and make it into 50 caliber bullets, fire them from shoulder-held weapons. In 1976, they obsoleted tank warfare with these things because it only takes one dog face with one weapon to knock out a 65-ton tank. It'll go through 3 inches of armor plate, and when it comes out the other side, it's that white hot spark that we just made. And the 5 men in that tank are dead, because it'll burn all of the oxygen out of the air and burn their flesh. 1976, they obsoleted tank warfare, and you never even knew that. They make 10,000 of those bullets every day in the United States. We got enough in arsenal to sink all of Russia's tanks, and our boys in the Defense Department don't even talk about it. Yeah, it's hazardous to your health. Reminds me, lead is hazardous to your health too, isn't it? Particularly if it's in a 45 slug like this and it hits you right here going about 2,600 feet per second. It's not the material, it's the impact from the velocity. let's be very specific in the words that we use. This particular chunk of lead came out of a human body. My son, who's a deputy sheriff, thought maybe I could use it on tour. That's called dying of lead poisoning. Anything less is a figment of the imagination because it's not soluble in body fluid either. This is a pellet of cobalt-59. If you put it in a reactor into a neutron field, you can convert cobalt-59 to cobalt-60, which gives off a gamma. It becomes the source that doctors use to irradiate patients to 7,000 Roentgen for one patient. The total dose absorbed by radiation workers at 3 Mile Island in the last 6 years is something like 1,500 Roentgen. 5 times more given to a single individual in a doctor's facility. Now, do you know why I say that the federal regulations are absurd? And if you live by those federal regulations, maybe you're being absurd too? I found out that it doesn't hurt me. You need to find out that it doesn't hurt me or you. In fact, the only reason for the existence of these big transcontinent distribution lines would be if they could compete with a small mass-produced reactor sitting in your backyard. Why don't they want you to? Because they are the federal energy cartel. They like to set the price, the total availability, and whether you can hook onto it, and if you don't pay your bill, cut you off. That's called power, domain, and control. And they like that. They do not want you to be energy independent. If you had one of these sitting in every 10-block area in Phoenix, you could tell the rest of the world to go get lost.
Galen insisted on the fact that radiation is merely heat or energy, and if a cell in your body receives too much, it causes the cell to die, not mutate. He ate uranium countless times, and drank and swam in the spent nuclear fuel. You may say, well, he might have done it, but he died of cancer or kidney failure, right? Wrong. He was born in 1926 and died in your lifetime. 2008, actually. And the best part is, he died of natural causes. He was 82. Galen alone blows this whole nuclear scare out of the water. If all nuclear power really is boiling water with hot rocks to turn turbines, and if it's so effective, why would they lie? Galen states that, at its core, federal nuclear material control law is about maintaining power and controlling the masses by eliminating self-sufficient energy sources. If someone had a small source of energy that was cheap and efficient, that person would be independent. They would have no need to be connected to the power grid. It's so effective, in fact, that the U.S. government needed a reason to keep people addicted to gasoline, to which, surprise, normal people like you and me cannot make for free. They needed people afraid of nuclear. Nuclear power would destabilize the economy, making us no longer the world's superpower. So I ask you a question. How would you make people afraid? That's where nukes, nuclear waste, nuclear meltdown, and radiation for thousands of years comes from. The video is getting long and I wanted to keep it under an hour, so I want to end with this hilarious clip of Ward Wilson discussing the myth of Hiroshima. Again, I recommend you watch the whole video. Since he's on live television, he can't just come right out and say it, but he gets around it in a really funny way. Simply, this guy gets it.
People would say nuclear weapons have a reputation that is established, well established, and no matter what we say, that reputation is going away. What would you say to that?
Well, when people talk about reputation, I always think of Patroclus. You remember Achilles' best friend was Patroclus. And Achilles was fighting in the war between the Achaeans and the Trojans, and they took his girl. So he was pouting in his tent. He said, I won't fight, I won't fight. And the Trojans, because Achilles was the best warrior, the Trojans were winning, the Achaeans were taking losses. And they were going to Achilles' tent, and they were saying, dude, you know, you've got to come, or whatever the Greek equivalent of dude is. Yeah, you've got to come fight for us. And Achilles was saying, I won't fight, I won't fight. Finally, his friend Patroclus comes and says, okay, you won't fight, give me your armor and I'll go fight. And Achilles says, okay. Patroclus puts on the famous breastplate, takes the helm, the shield, he goes out, and for a while, the reputation of Achilles carries the day. The Trojans fall back and the Achaeans make up lost ground. But eventually Hector says, well, Achilles or no Achilles, I have to go out and fight him. And he puts on his armor and he goes out, and Apollo sneaks up behind Patroclus and knocks him down. He doesn't hurt him, but his helmet comes off. And the Trojans see that it is not the great Achilles inside the armor. It's just an ordinary man, and they run him through with spears. And I think that reputation can be useful in foreign policy and in defense, but I want the real Achilles to defend me. I don't want to rely on just a reputation, because reputations can turn out to be false. So I think it's important to be realistic and not simply rely on the reputation of a nuclear weapon.
Okay, we're going to pick up on this tomorrow, talk about reputation versus reality.
Look at bro's grin. I am so dead. Anyway, what if I'm wrong and nukes do exist as described? Well, I guess I've convinced myself and maybe a few others to not be afraid of something actually dangerous, which in the grand scheme of things would affect nothing. You being afraid of a nuke has no bearing on whether or not any bomb would destroy you. Given the massive censorship around this topic, this was very difficult to research. Videos on this topic don't tend to be around on YouTube for very long. Search for nuclear hoax videos and you'll see what I mean. So your support really helps me out. Like and share this video with anyone that may find this topic interesting. All your beliefs add up to create real changes in your psychopathy. What does your mosaic consist of? Do all your pieces fit together? If not, I suggest you figure out which piece is wrong and throw it out. Thank you for watching. Cue montage.
No, I don't listen to their wasted lines. Got my eyes wide open and I see the signs. They say we're crazy, but I just don't care. And if they keep on talking, still they get nowhere. So I don't mind if they don't understand when I look at you and you hold my hand. 'Cause they
People are calling this a meltdown.
Oh, meltdown. It's one of those annoying buzzwords. We prefer to call it an unrequested fission surplus.
living in the past. Now I found good love and gonna make it last. And I don't listen to the voices say that you beg for me and I should turn you away. Why should it matter to us if they don't approve? We should just take our chances while we've got nothing to lose.
You're alive!
All the layers of lead paint in this house made it the perfect bomb shelter.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
And shame on you, Peter, scaring the kids with your nuclear holocaust nonsense.
Baby, there's no need for living in the past. Now I found good love and gonna make it last. I tell the others don't bother me, 'cause when they look at you, they don't see what I see. No, I don't listen to their wasted lines. Got my eyes wide open and I see the signs.
Couple of my shoes, couple of my shoes.
No,